Hello, my name is Natalia.
My name is Bethany.
I'm Laura.
This is Codex Machina. This is a podcast where we discuss reading, publishing, and all things books. Hi everybody. Hello. Welcome to another episode of Codex Machina.
We're happy you're with us.
We are getting together today to talk about serialization and what happens when a serial publication fails or drops off right in the middle. We're going to talk a little bit about reader reactions and the concept of parasociality. But first, we're going to talk about making book history.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. We do always like to talk a little bit about what's going on, current events with the world of books, and today our topic is an article from Publishers Weekly about content bans in research databases for students.
Isn't it fun? I wish our making book history were, more like positive.
Look at all these wonderful things that are getting published that had never been published before. But no, we have to focus on things getting banned and censorship.
What we're talking about in this case is an organization called Library Futures, who decided to take a look at what exactly students were using research databases for in their school system. They wanted to undertake this study because of content ban challenges going on with these kind of parent rights groups and pro-censorship in school groups, to kind of see whether there was any validity to their claims that students having access to this data was giving them access to age-inappropriate material, pornography, things like that. What the report by Library Futures said was, we can say these claims are bogus. Basically, they said that after studying normal school use of public databases like EBSCO, SAGE, ProQuest, these kind of things, students were using it exactly as intended. They were using it to look up answers to homework. They were using it to write research papers. There was a lot of top searches for things like coronavirus, online education, gun control, and very, very few access requests for things that these parent groups were concerned about. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, they're thinking that a lot of these databases are starting to self-censor and set up keyword access control to prevent students from looking at certain topics, just sort of on the chance that it might get challenged by one of these pro-censorship groups. And of course, the pro-censorship groups have started to understand that these research databases exist, and they are starting to go after them, not only these, actual books that are in the library, but also these places where students get articles and stuff. So these are under fire, but, there is kind of a message coming from this report that says it's really unnecessary worry. Your kids aren't using these systems the way you're worried that they're using them, and kind of a warning to the people who run the databases not to voluntarily self-censor.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what's going on.
And I think it's really troubling in the light of the things that are happening today when you've got a list of keywords that are getting banned for grants and research and sciences and humanities and what have you, to end up potentially seeing a ban on these terms, keyword bans in databases, would be catastrophic to education in the United States. And if these databases decide to self-impose these restrictions, that could be potentially very dangerous, I think.
Yeah. Well, part of the trouble that you're getting with the school access to these databases is that these are studying like K through 12 schools, and there is a completely different amount of material that you want to have available to a 10-year-old versus to an 18-year-old. An 18-year-old is an adult and has every right to access any information they'd like to see.
Right.
And so you run into this really complex issue of how do you restrict the databases to protect kids who aren't ready for certain things versus people who are capable of making that choice for themselves.
Right.
And who are getting ready to go off to college where they are going to have access to this data and need to know how to use the database that way.
Yeah, so hopefully this madness will end soon.
I doubt that it will end soon. I mean, this has been going on for a while now, right? Like this, we want to blame this on certain people in certain government positions, but I don't think that that's the beginning and end of it. These censorship bans were going on while we had a fairly liberal Democratic president in office in America. And I don't think this is solely an American problem anymore either. So I don't think we can count on it to just simply go away if there's a change in government position. It's something, we need to actually vocally defend students' right to access information instead of hoping that something will change all on its own.
As all good things are. Have to defend. But I feel like that probably calls for a different discussion as well on to what extent parents should be involved in deciding what should or should not be made accessible to their children in public libraries. Or is it just basically their own family education as to educate their children on to what the databases are for? How can they be used? Same way as we these days show our kids like, hey, this is the online dictionary you can use for language practice and so on. Like something that should come from the family, probably, hopefully. But then again, we'll circle back to the same issue, like who gets to decide?
Yeah, I mean, we're recording this from Germany, where school children actually have encoded rights for themselves and can defend their right to certain things, and they don't have to rely solely on what their parents say they can or can't do until they're 18. That's not something that children in the US have, unfortunately. So
right. And then in the end, it comes down to, some content that some parents would say kids shouldn't have, but other parents think is important for children to have. And there's a fine line between outright pornography and saying someone shouldn't learn a book about two moms, or research about other things that are happening in the real world
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing too, is like you're putting children into a public school system, which is good. Absolutely no arguments there. And so what you want for your child should not encroach upon the rights of what someone else wants for their child. And if a large group of parents whose children attend one school think their children should have access to information, it's not your right or responsibility to take that away from them.
Right.
You can only have that control over what your child is doing. And I think that's one of the things that has gotten very lost in some of these conversations about what books are and aren't appropriate for what age group. Because the real question is not really necessarily, well, if you're 13, you can read this book, or if you're 14, you can read this book. It's the parent has the right to choose that for their child and with their child. And it's not some other parent's right to remove the entire possibility of that choice from others.
And hopefully we'll have a more intense episode about libraries and things that are going on, because it seems like things in the United States, at least, might be changing radically over the next months and years, depending.
Yeah, I mean, now we're entering a phase where we need to defend an adult's right to be able to access the information as well, and whether that information should exist in the first place, which is terrifying.
For sure.
That should never be in question.
And we should probably also, for the sake of future generations and researchers, state we're recording this
in March of 2025.
Yeah, so
great time to be alive.
Yes.
Things change basically
Every day, yeah.
So I feel like we need to make this disclaimer, because by the time that episode airs, who knows what world we're going to live in.
Yeah.
That's really true. I'm trying to keep some of my statements slightly more vague because I don't know what's gone on in the last couple of days, and I don't know what will be going on by the time this episode airs.
Exactly. May you live in interesting times.
I'm so tired of interesting times. I would like to go and live in some boring times for a while. Would be great.
Boring is good.
Yes.
Boring is comfortable, safe, it's fine. If you're bored, go read a book.
Yeah,
if they're still allowed to read books, sure.
Well, good luck finding boring times in history, really. So.
True. Okay, so this has been an extremely salty entry into making book history. Next up, we're going to start with talking about books as a series, fan response to books as a series, and we'll start with one of the most famous and classic examples of this discussion we're about to have, Mr. Arthur Conan Doyle and his character Sherlock Holmes.
Yes. So, I mean, I have in front of me, we can all look at it, there's a cartoon from 1926 in Punch magazine, I think it was. And there's a very large figure of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. He's chained to a chair. And next to him is a little figure of Sherlock Holmes, his famous detective, and kind of displaying how Doyle was very much forced to stick to this character as a writer, even though he would have rather written historical fiction and released himself from this burden of this fictional detective. Anyway, so a little bit about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's experience. In 1891, he published the first Sherlock Holmes in the Strand magazine, which ended up being a very lucrative partnership for both Doyle and the magazine itself. The magazine was already popular, but their circulation jumped dramatically after the first publication of a Sherlock Holmes mystery. And throughout the year 1891, all these stories were published. And then the publisher of The Strand collected the stories in The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, which was simultaneously released in England and America in 1892, to a lot of critical acclaim. People loved it. And then the second Holmes series ran through 1893, also in The Strand, doing well. But at the end of this, in December 1893, in a story called The Final Problem, Sherlock Holmes died. Sorry if this is a spoiler alert for anybody. Anyway, this was really upsetting for a lot of people, for fans, but especially for The Strand, which lost 20,000 subscribers immediately upon the death of Sherlock Holmes. In the meantime, Doyle very stubbornly was trying to publish a lot of other things, to not very great success, generally. It seemed that Holmes was still haunting him through the 1890s. And at one point, in around late 1800s, Doyle had an idea to make a stage play of Sherlock Holmes, but didn't finish the script. And at this time, the American actor William Gillette asked Doyle, hey, can I have the rights to it and do something? And Doyle said, sure, go ahead. And in 1899, Gillette had the stage play released in America and then eventually in Britain, and it did really well. And I think, this will show kind of a break between the author and his work and it taking a life of its own outside of this. But then later, in the Strand, in 1901, The Hound of the Baskervilles was serialized, and then further stories of Sherlock Holmes were published after that. So he did not break the chains, and thus the cartoon.
Can you imagine, like, this was one beloved character who was killed off, and that was the reaction that literally almost cost the Meantime magazine its work, basically. And these people have not met Martin.
Yeah.
George Martin. Can you imagine that level of outcry?
Well, we'll get to George Martin.
Yeah.
But let's actually start, I think, with why we wanted to talk about this anyway, because we were just having coffee and you brought up Rebecca Yarros.
Yeah, but that's, as any good conversation these days starts with some romantasy. I do find the romantasy genre fascinating, and especially this latest sort of popularity of series like Sarah J. Maas' ACOTAR, A Court of Thorns and Roses, and the sequels, not the sequels, and the following books, and The Fourth Wing. So I've actually recently listened to the first audiobook of The Fourth Wing, just so that I would be able to actually objectively-ish talk about it. And as always, what I find most fascinating about this book is its marketing strategy and the relationship that the author has with readers. Because the popularity of The Fourth Wing is just incredible. I believe it has more than 1 billion hits or hashtag mentions on Book Talk. So that is quite a hit. So obviously they sell like hotcakes, these books, and it's 3 books that are out now, and the 4th book is supposed to come at some point. And in one of the interviews, Rebecca Yarros, the author, was asked, when can we expect the 4th book? Because she left it on a huge cliffhanger. Of course, people want to know what's going to happen next. Her response in different interviews sounds a little bit different, but the idea is in general that she's not working on it right now. She will do it whenever she gets inspired, so to say, because right now she's writing other books, other series that she as an author would like to, continue, try out. I believe it's a contemporary romance novel or novels. I'm not sure if it's a series. Basically, I feel like in some of the interviews, it sounded a little bit offhanded to me. I have to say the audience, the fans of the genre, the fans of the franchise were incredibly excited about it. So this kind of answer to me sounded a little bit like...
Maybe flippant?
Flippant, yeah. A bit like, I do it when I do it.
Yeah.
And I'm not even going to give you an approximate deadline.
Well, and when you started talking to us about this little incident, let's call it an incident, I don't know, it reminded me a lot of something that has been basically going on since I've been reading, because I have been, since, a young person, a very avid fan of, the really traditional doorstopper fantasy novels, and I have seen it happen over and over at this point, right? There was George R.R. Martin, of course, who has never finished the Game of Thrones series. Well, it's called The Song of Ice and Fire, but everybody knows it as the Game of Thrones series, I think, at this point. He published 5 out of 7 books, and we've been stuck at number 5 for, I think, well over 10 years. I'm not sure, maybe 15. Very similar story with an author called Patrick Rothfuss and his books The Wise Man's Fear and The Name of the Wind. We're still waiting for the 3rd entry in that trilogy. I have been for years now. Then it happened again with an author called Scott Lynch, who started this series called the Gentleman Bastards series, and he's got 3 out of 7 done. And not quite the same, but getting there with Jim Butcher, who publishes the Dresden Files books. So this is a long, long list, and these are just the ones that I have personally read the books of and have been waiting all these years for new entries in the series. I say Jim Butcher he's on thin ice still because he did publish one as recently as 2020. But what I consider kind of very similar about all of these authors is that every single one of them has said they know what they're doing and they know where they're going with these books and they know exactly how to get there. I think Patrick Rothfuss even famously said the third book was already written and was just needed to be edited. And then somehow all these years later, it hasn't happened.
Checks in the mail.
And this is... I want to put the caveat out front that I do not have any anger or blame, and I refuse to speculate on why any of those series are unfinished. People have their own lives, right? But it does bring up a really, really interesting topic in regards to exactly this question that was presented to us through Sherlock Holmes, which is the reader reaction, the reader response to these series, and what kind of, if any, responsibility the author has to behave in a certain way when it comes to these series that they make, these cultural products, let's call them, that they are promising and then not delivering. Now, of course, Sherlock Holmes is a little bit different because I don't think Conan Doyle was promising much. He killed the character, and I think that there was a definitive period at the end of a sentence there, and he simply caved into a lot of pressure. But it's my theory, I guess we could say, that the publishing landscape and the performance of authorship has changed a lot in the modern era to make that a more complicated question than it used to be.
I have to admit, I do have not anger, but definitely anxiety. Even right now, you were listing all these unfinished series. And I'm like, what do you mean? 10 years and you don't know what the ending is. I feel like just the fact that it's unfinished sort of gives me this reader anxiety that there is no officially known intention how the author intended to finish them. However, at the same time, I don't have the same feeling for unfinished fan fiction. And that is, as always, a rather famous situation when you invest your time and your reading attention into a lovely story that has last been updated in 2016. And it's not finished, and you're like, oh no. So I don't feel the same anxiety, I guess reading anxiety, as in the case of unfinished series. And I don't know if it has something to do with me knowing the intention of the author for the characters and the storyline, or just the fact that it's unfinished. Maybe that's my issue. I don't know.
For me, the question then begins to be, how do these authors determine the numbers of books that they want to write? Is this something that comes from their contract, from the publisher? Is this something they've already formulated in their head? And then the fan response, especially today in the world of social media, do the publishing companies, which obviously lose out a little bit when these series don't continue on a regular basis, do they try to prompt the fandoms to be persistent, to have this kind of response? That's, would be my question.
So I know that always it super depends on the contract an author has with the publishing house, especially when they talk about book series. Mm-hmm. They very often can say, we need, or we sign up the contract, we give you, what do you call this? Money you get before advance. We give you the advance for, let's say, 5 copies, and you obviously have to, deliver. And I think my impression with the series of novels Icebreaker, Wildfire, and Daydream, hockey romance, mm-hmm. where I feel like the first novel really has so much detail in it. The second novel is all right, but you already can see that it's getting less. It's getting thinner. It's getting more linear and clear. And the third novel, while still being absolutely sweet, it has even less of that. The characters are way more straightforward. the storyline is much simpler, and I feel like that might have been one of those cases when she needed to deliver 3 books. Hannah Grace, the author. But by the 3rd book, you can already really see how, like, she was done with the first.
So you're kind of conjecturing that maybe she only intended to write 1 book, but she was talked into a trilogy by her publisher and had to come up with material for it that maybe she wasn't so passionate about.
I feel like, there were elements she definitely commented, especially in the 3rd book. She commented a lot about the representation of potentially representation of neurodivergence and autism. And she said, like, this character is clearly not diagnosed, has never been diagnosed. I will not diagnose him in this book. So do not come to me with the questions, is he autistic? Like, read it for yourselves, which I think is actually a really good move. But if you compare the complexity of characters in the storyline and also the page count between Icebreaker, the 1st novel, and Daydream, the 3rd novel, you can see the difference. And it just feels less. Not in the quality, but in just like how much is in it.
The interiority, maybe.
Yeah. So again, my personal impression, I still love all of these books. It does not reflect on the quality, but I feel like I could see her herself losing the interest in expanding this particular aspect so much.
And then as fans, as readers, do we want authors to push themselves to write content that they don't feel inspired by themselves? I guess that's the other question. And to me, that's the point where fan fiction should come in.
Yeah. I mean, if that's something that you're feeling unfulfilled by a piece of artwork, because a novel is a piece of artwork, and your response to it is your responsibility as a reader. And if you're establishing this emotional connection and you're feeling like you're not getting what you need from it, it's up to you to do something about that. And the thing to do about that is not to find the author's Twitter account and start abusing them there. That is completely unacceptable behavior. And I feel like that's what was going on with Arthur Conan Doyle at one point, is people were writing into the Strand and calling him names. And I'm like, well, that's a great way to get the next Sherlock Holmes book. I'm sure that he's feeling really in love with his fans right now.
But of course, since Doyle had also stated that his sole purpose for writing was to make money, he had hoped to make it from historical novels, but didn't, or historical writing.
Yeah, I kind of think I know what you mean, because this is the Stephen King approach, right? It's a job.
Right.
If you're writing as a job to make money, you need to have a certain ability to set aside, oh, do I feel inspired? Oh, am I so emotionally attached to this character? And just say, I made an outline for this book, and I will sit down and I will pack out on a typewriter until the book is done.
Right.
That's the Stephen King approach.
Right. But I think we also have the standpoint of the Strand magazine, which was before they even introduced the Sherlock Holmes stories. They were a very successful magazine. But then introducing Holmes, it all practically doubled their circulation. And so I feel like, there might have been more pressure, especially if you've got people writing in, well, I'm canceling because there's no more Sherlock Holmes. And so since Doyle and this publisher, George Newnes of the Strand, had this great relationship, that there might have been, pressure between them personally to say, look, you need to do this because what if the magazine goes down? You'll make more money. We have to think about this. So I think in every case, we have to think about the publisher's impact and not just the fans' response.
Well, and that's why I was wanting to talk about parasociality a little bit and talk about the fact that this kind of thing has changed in the modern era. Because I have an academic response to it and a personal response to it, as someone who has done some studying about it and as someone who has been part of this fanish community that has been impacted by it. So I'm going to read a couple of quotes that I will try to make as brief as possible from Simone Murray's book, The Digital Literary Sphere. And this is on the topic of parasociality, but it's very much about how deliberately crafted this is. So let's start with, so long as the literary author's physical image and personal biography remained largely tangential to book culture, confined perhaps to paratextual matter, such as the back flap, the writerly persona could be considered largely a matter of textual effects and implied author roles. But the late 20th century flourishing of author tours, writers' festivals, ... there's a big list, has meant that authorial embodiment and performativity have come to be key and controversial criteria in the marketing, reception, and evaluation of literary fiction. ... Their specifically digital realm manifestations remain even more lamentably unexplored. This omission is particularly glaring on the issue of how disintermediation and real-time interactivity fundamentally alter the nature of reader-writer encounters, even to the extent of collapsing that traditional print culture dyad. So that's a lot to digest already, of course, but I do have more. Because I want to talk a little bit more about the specifically social media relationship. Still quoting from The Digital Literary Sphere, actual author use of social media can perversely enhance the lopsidedness of the author-reader encounter by providing the illusion of a direct means of communicating with the authorial persona, but one which the author takes up only at their own discretion, if at all. Here authors appear to be engaged in a profoundly lopsided transaction, availing themselves of the interactive capabilities of social media to communicate, quote, unmediated, unquote, with their followers, but withholding the possibility of a direct two-way exchange on more equal terms. So, that was a lot, but generally what we're talking about here is that authors are both expected and encouraged to participate in this culture and create this illusion of being friends with their fans. I think then you run into these issues like maybe what Rebecca Yarros is running into right now, what George Martin has run into multiple times now, where the performance on social media has led to fans taking it seriously and thinking, okay, we're friends. So when you're online, I'm going to ask you about when your book is coming out. And it was a huge controversy. It sparked a lot of conversations among my friends. There was a bunch of us that worked together in a bookstore, and we would share recommendations with each other, and we'd also share recommendations into the rest of our friend community. This is how Patrick Rothfuss caught on like wildfire amongst us. Is my roommate read it, and then I read it, and then her best friend read it, and then my brother read it. You know, it was a really word of mouth situation. We supported Patrick Rothfuss both commercially and socially. Some of us went to Comic-Con and met him. You know, I've met George Martin at a convention, and they're fun and friendly people to be around, and you get the sense of, oh, this is just a guy, and he really wants to share his book with me, so when he doesn't share his book with me for 10 years, I should ask him how he's doing, right? And then there's this pushback, and you get this author who's so annoyed to be asked, because of course they're being asked 20 times a day, and you're like, oh, okay, we're not friends then. Okay, I see. But, you know, that it's a kind of, I don't want to say vulnerable thing to be doing, to put yourself out there with this, you know, celebrity that you're looking up to. And of course, these are like, this is not a celebrity like Brad Pitt is a celebrity or anything, but a celebrity within that community. And to kind of feel the sting of having your hand slapped when you reach out, let's say.
Yeah. And I feel like this is a good time to bring up Stephen King's Misery, where you've got the fan who very violently forces a writer to to do what they require of the fandom. And yeah. still kind of horrifying. I think that whole, the movie especially, which was very well acted, I think has left me traumatized completely.
I mean, yeah, the fact that that's even in the cultural consciousness enough that there was a book about it and a
Right.
movie about it, and everybody kind of knows Misery, I think.
Right.
And the fact that this is a fear that authors have is wild.
Right, right. But I mean, we're thinking, when was Misery written?
I think in the 90s?
Maybe
exactly
earlier.
Maybe
I don't know. But I mean, just to think that this kind of pushback, even before social media, was something that authors had to contend with and think about and worry about.
And I feel like that could be a nice moment to add another quote.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to mention something from Beth Driscoll's What Readers Do, Aesthetic and Moral Practices of a Post-Digital Age, because she specifically focuses on performativity of BookTok, Bookstagram, BookTube, all these communities. And in a chapter on the moral force of readers, she says that, I quote, "Social media and digital platforms have facilitated new ground-up expressions of readers' moral views. This is a cause of concern and fear for some. Readers can be pitched as puritanical censors, as vigilantes, as pushing on the levers of capitalist machinery to suppress the creativity of authors."
Well, and that brings us to the ultimate question: is a book a piece of art, and your responsibility as the viewer of art with how you engage with it, or is a book a commercial product with a sort of warranty provided by the publisher? I think, this is a question that's been tossed around in the classrooms that we've studied in for enough points where you kind of have to say, it's both. It's both. And in the modern era, as editors move to make books in a series more and more cliffhanger-y, let's say, to try this marketing tactic to get people to want the next one really voraciously, individual entries in a series no longer always feel like a satisfying standalone story the way they kind of used to. I think, for example, of Robin Hobb as one of my favorite fantasy authors, had a really long-running 16-book series about the same characters, and each individual book was a book with a story, with a start and a middle and an end. And yes, of course, you wanted to know what was going to happen next, but if something had ever happened that the series couldn't continue, you wouldn't be left with a literal cliffhanger, that's where the term came from, of somebody dangling from a cliff and wondering if they were going to make it out alive or not. Whereas I feel like today, books get pushed through editing a little more in that direction. And so you're no longer seeing them purely as a piece of artwork, purely as a story, but as a piece in a longer story that you are not necessarily going to get the end of.
Well, and that makes that more of a commodity.
Exactly.
Because then we're going back to the triple decker, where you had to pull out these stories through 3 volumes, in the 1800s, just so these lending libraries could have, you rent this book and then you get this one and then you get this one. But then does it still become art? And I think we have enough examples of the commodity of the particular story. With Sherlock Holmes, sure, someone else took the play and was successful with it and went on. And in today, we have all these examples of very successful fan fiction, like Shades of Grey and...
Manacled.
Yeah. I mean, there's several examples of people that go on and take the art and then make a new commodity out of it. And maybe it's just better to not say, oh, I'm doing this many, and just let the reader be pleasantly surprised with, oh, there's another one. Oh, there's another one. Oh, there's another one.
Yeah.
So
unfortunately, that doesn't work for a publisher's marketing scheme, right?
But it, not every book has that. So, the publisher has the ability to force the market to think differently. And if they would present it differently, then maybe people would accept that. maybe.
Yeah.
But now I think everything is about, the all caps headline and the this is happening and something crazy. And so everything has to be.
Well, and also it needs to
Yeah.
be sexy on TikTok.
Right.
And not to really out ourselves as book studies people, but the communication circuit.
Right,
Here we
right,
go.
right.
We're going to talk about Darton's communication
Of
circuit
course
for a
we are,
second.
because it's important.
The collapse between reader and author is absolute at this point. The readers are the authors, or the readers are the authors. And so there has started to be some pushback against, how publishers are handling it. There are some authors who are extremely vocal and open with their readers on some mistreatment at their publishing houses. And the readers are very much on the author's side of these things. There's one author that I can think of in particular named, I'm definitely going to say this wrong because I've literally never seen them say their name out loud. Xiranjay Zhao. It's Iron Widow and that series. And I think they have a young adult novel called Zachary Yang. Point being that they have been very vocal about the fact that their ability to go viral on social media should not be affecting their book sales. It should not be part of their publisher's marketing strategy for them to shake their ass on TikTok in their own words. Like, that's an expectation that they need to do their own marketing to that level. Like, they're an author. They want to sit behind a computer and type some words. They do not want to be, necessarily having to do that for their publisher. Why is that not their publisher's responsibility, let's say? And I think that their fans' response to that issue has been really positively on their side. Like, yeah, we love seeing you, but if you don't want to be doing this, we're so sorry.
So that's why, I feel like presence of some authors and being involved and being active booktuber themselves is one way to do it. But at the same time, does that put us in a position where the readers can come and say, hey, we got invested in your book series and we want continuation. Where is it?
Yeah.
And you're like, hey guys, I'm working on other things now.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I guess for me, I'm like, of course you should work on whatever you want to work on. And if you don't want to work on anything, then don't. You have no responsibility or obligation, I don't believe, to finish a series that you don't feel like finishing or that you can't finish for whatever reason. Again, I refuse to speculate on any of these. But I am also under no obligation to continue buying your books if they ever start coming out again. The last time I got to read a book in this series was 15 years ago. I've moved on as a person. There are other books I want to read now.
Right.
I no longer recommend this series to people. I will not recommend this series to people because it's incomplete. It is not emotionally satisfying to read in that way. And at the time when they were new and they were first getting published, it was because you had this serialization can actually be a really fun way to read, right? But if the serialization just stops really, really abruptly, yeah, we all had our disappointment. We all had our feeling of, oh, well, that's sad. I hope they're okay, and then we found other things to do. And I don't think that at this point I would ever, even if the book was published, the next in the series, I don't know that I would want to go back to it.
And I find in addition to this, we have another segment of readers who explicitly state, I am not going to start reading a series that is not finished yet. I'm not going to wait for another 2 years for it to come out. They just wait for the whole series to come out and then they can start.
Yeah, and I kind of, in some ways, I can understand that. That's not a way that I myself am. I will read an ongoing series. And if the disappointment happens to me, it happens. I'm, a healthy enough person that not getting to finish a book series won't emotionally destroy me. It's just a book. But there's all these, HBO cancels the show, Netflix cancels the show. And it happens in the world of fan fiction really often too. And a lot of people do both, right? If you're watching a show on Netflix, a huge number of people are also looking up and checking for fan fiction about that same show, right? And these unfinished series leave people kind of gun shy about starting an unfinished thing these days. Like, I've seen it happen in the fan fiction community as well, because I am pretty involved there, that people are starting an ongoing series and they don't really get any readers until they're almost done, or until they've marked it as complete, because a lot of people will filter out incomplete stories. They don't want to look at them anymore because they've been, let's call it, burned too many times.
Well, then again, maybe let's switch the intent to be, this is going to be a multi-series book. We can't tell you how many. And then that takes away expectation, both for author, for reader, for publisher. It leaves the door open. I don't know. I mean, I've never been much of a series reader, more like things like Sherlock Holmes or Agatha Christie, where they're individual stories that you just keep liking to read what the protagonists are doing. But, you know, then the industry needs to change how it does it, because if it does affect fans, if it does affect people, how they receive a book or how they decide to read something if it's not complete or whatever, then I think it kind of disrupts the reading experience in a way that's, I don't know, it's unfulfilling. And I think it can potentially change the way readers think about work.
Yeah, I mean, it is also true that the digital century, or whatever we're calling it, has led to an increased understanding of books as commodity over books as culture. People are reading 100 or 200 books every year and are constantly like, where's the next one? Where's the next one? To their favorite authors. And they're expecting their favorite authors to be able to put out a book or two every single year, which is just, that's a huge expectation to have, especially when you consider that most authors, the vast 99% majority of authors, are doing this in their free time around another job that they actually do to make money, because being an author doesn't pay that well. And so I think part of the problem is actually the expectation that's being set up by the publisher, the expectations that's being set up by the parasocial relationship on social media, that there is this pace, this punishing pace that authors are expected to be able to meet that is really just not realistic for most of them. And they burn out. And we're just now finding out, you know, like health-wise, that burnout is a real condition that actually affects your health. It's not really studied very well at this point, but I kind of, and I said I wasn't going to speculate, but I'm speculating a little bit. I wonder how many of these authors are just experiencing the burnout of having to go to guest star on a podcast and go to a book signing event in one city and then a different book signing event in another city the next night, and this and that and the other thing. It's too much to do on top of writing the books, on top of the way fans expect the book to. And I don't know, as an author, would you want to take part in that system?
I would not.
And of course, you know, you could self-publish if all you care about is just making a piece of art, but I don't know, writing and publishing a book is the kind of art where you're really wanting to have community. You're wanting to talk about your ideas with somebody. And self-publishing usually doesn't lead to getting to have a lot of great conversations with people unless you're going to spend all of your free time doing a lot of heavy marketing for yourself. In conclusion, what are we reading, guys?
I am actually reading a lovely book series. Oh, I feel like I've talked about this one before. God damn it. I'm still reading the same book series.
No, Yay! I'm still reading the same book series. This
Yes.
ongoing book series.
We're talking about book series.
Well, no, unfortunately, this time it's just me reading very slowly. It is a very short book series for now. It's 3 books are out. It's Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies.
Okay.
A book I've been talking about for the last 2 years. It is very cute, but also I'm just not very fast at reading. What are you reading?
Well, right now, as of this moment, nothing. But I am about to start both Orbital by Samantha Harvey and Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Speaking of book talk books, that one, of course, got a huge surge in popularity because of book talk, but I've had it for a while. And while I was sitting on a train with a friend the other day, I happened to be scrolling through a Storygraph account, and I just kind of handed my phone to my friend and said, "Here, pick my next read. Here's the list of books that I own. I need to pick one." And she said,
That's good.
Song of Achilles. So, Orbital is for book club, Song of Achilles is for me.
Orbital is really good. So,
Laura, what are you reading?
I am reading, well, as I said before, I don't really read series. The 2 things I'm reading are actually series, and one I just started, which Bethany had let me borrow, and it's Have Mercy. I'm not sure the
Jada
authors.
Jones and Danielle Bennett.
Okay, so
It
that's
is
fun.
so niche. I never hear of people who have read it, but I love talking about it and recommend it highly. Have Mercy, Jada Jones and Danielle Bennett.
I'm enjoying it a lot, but the second series is the Quantum Curators series by Eva St. John. And I'm kind of perplexed by it because at first I thought, because it's about 2 Earths, and one of the Earths is superior, supposedly, and it goes to Beta Earth, which is our Earth, and rescues artifacts that are in danger of being lost forever. And so, of course, I think in my head, okay, British Museum, anyone, and these kind of things. And now I'm thinking, as I'm into the second book, that maybe this is partially kind of where she's coming from. I mean, it's a fun story. It's very, not too serious in its thing, but maybe she is kind of making a commentary on what is the responsibility of maintaining these things and keeping these things, and would it matter if it gets destroyed or not? And how do we, properly deal with this? Or maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I feel like, I'm getting a lot of sense in that as I'm reading the second one, that the author is kind of aware of this aspect of it. But it's fun. It's, so.
That is lovely. Yeah. See, I like how I don't read book series, but here it is.
And you're the one who's reading series right now. Me, the chronic reader of series, I'm only reading standalones at the moment.
I feel like I'm reading like 5 books parallel.
Yeah.
I do that a lot though.
Yeah.
I like to always have like one novel going, a book of poetry, a nonfiction, and then maybe a second novel that's kind of a different vibe, just in case.
Yeah, I mean, because you're in different moods at different times. And it's the same thing with like TV series you're watching. Well, I need this one because I'm in this mood, or this one because I'm in this mood.
Well, so like you have different music playlists for sitting and writing something, or a different music playlist for cleaning the house. So you also need a different book for curled up on the couch on a rainy day versus out at the park listening to kids screaming.
Yeah, absolutely. Something to fall asleep to. All right. Thank you guys for listening. Leave comments, like and subscribe.
Tell us what you're reading.
Yes, please. Not that.
Bye.
Bye.